My parents seemed upset that I woke up from my coma. I noticed it the second they stepped into my hospital room. No relieved tears, no rushing over to embrace me, just my mother lingering near the doorway with her arms folded, grimacing while my dad rubbed the back of his neck like he wasn't sure what to do now that I was awake. Making matters worse, I had no memories. Not the accident, not my past, not even my own name until they mentioned it. But something deep inside told me these people weren't glad I survived. Once the doctor finally stepped out, my mother put on a weak smile. "Let's bring you home," that was all. "No, we were so worried about you." Or, "Thank heavens you pulled through." I assumed they were simply overwhelmed, maybe exhausted from months of waiting for me to recover, but it turned out to be far worse than that. At the house, I wasn't treated like someone healing from a coma. I was treated like hired help. My mother made me wash dishes and mop floors, and my dad had me cleaning gutters and hauling trash. There were no family dinners together, nothing but tasks. But gradually, pieces of my memory began returning, like living in a different home, different bedroom, different name people called me. Eventually, I mentioned it to my parents. "Do you remember which lake we visited a few summers back?" I asked. My mom's face tensed for just a moment before she smiled. "Oh, sweetheart, those aren't real memories. They're just hallucinations. The doctors told us this could happen," she said. My dad nodded in agreement. "Your mind is still recovering. Don't believe everything it shows you." I eventually quit bringing things up when I noticed that every time I recalled something new, they acted like I was going crazy. And truthfully, after nearly a week of them insisting my brain was damaged, I started to believe them. Then one afternoon, I returned to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. I was sitting in the lobby when someone shouted out a nickname, the exact one my parents claimed was just a hallucination. I glanced up and spotted a guy about my age approaching me with a wide smile. "No kidding," he said, wrapping me in a firm hug. "I can't believe this. You're conscious and walking around." He laughed, stepping back and circling me, looking me over. He waved his wife over, telling her how we'd been buddies in college before my accident. We chatted for a while, catching up on a life I couldn't recall. And then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Your parents would be thrilled right now." I stared at him. "What do you mean? They see me every single day?" He gave me a puzzled look. "You mean they see you every day from the afterlife, right?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, more like at home right now, expecting me back kind of every day," I clarified. His smile instantly disappeared. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone, scrolling back through years of pictures until he located what he wanted, a memorial program, 2 coffins positioned next to each other, a ceremony from 3 years ago. "They passed away together a couple months after you slipped into the coma. They went off an overpass right into a river. The authorities recovered their bodies still buckled into their seats with their fingers intertwined," he said softly. "They left everything to the hospital to keep you on life support, praying you'd come back someday. And look at you now." His eyes began welling up. He showed me additional photos, him standing at the gravesite, wreaths everywhere, my real parents' names engraved on the markers. But this could only mean one thing. The people at the house weren't my parents. They were total strangers. I drove back to the house, nervously clutching the steering wheel. When I stepped through the front entrance, my mom was sitting in the living room, watching me with an icy, emotionless stare. "How was your hospital appointment? Did you discover anything interesting?" she asked, probing me. I looked at her for a long moment before asking, "Who are you?" She hesitated. "Hey, he figured it out," she called out. My dad came down the staircase with a rifle and pointed it at me. "Sorry, kid, just business." He fired just as I dropped down and bolted for the exit. Mom attempted to block my path, but I pushed her aside and sprinted straight to my car. Just as I started the engine, another blast shattered my rear window. I floored the accelerator and raced directly to the police station. I couldn't fit what happens next in this short video, watch the rest down below. I burst through the front doors of the station, panting and wild-eyed, glass fragments still glittering in my hair from the shattered window. A uniformed officer at the front desk jumped to her feet, hand instinctively moving toward her holstered weapon. "Sir, are you injured?" she asked, scanning me for visible wounds. "Someone just tried to kill me," I gasped, bracing myself against the counter. "2 people. They've been pretending to be my parents. They're not my parents. My real parents are dead." The officer's expression shifted from alarm to something closer to concern, the kind of look you give someone who might be unhinged. "Okay, sir, let's slow down. Why don't you have a seat and—" "I'm not crazy," I interrupted. "I just woke up from a 3-year coma. I have memory problems. These people claim to be my family, took me to their house, and when I found out the truth, the man shot at me with a rifle. Twice. That got her attention. She picked up a phone and spoke quietly into it, never taking her eyes off me. Within minutes, a detective emerged from a back hallway. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying temples and a face that looked like it had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. "I'm Detective Holbrook," he said, extending his hand. "Officer Reyes tells me you've had quite an evening. Come on back." I followed him to a small interview room where he had me sit across from him at a metal table. He placed a recorder between us and hit the button. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Take your time." So I did. I told him about waking up in the hospital with no memories, about the couple who claimed to be my parents, about the way they made me work instead of recover. I told him about the fragmented memories that kept surfacing and how they convinced me I was hallucinating. I told him about running into my college friend Derek at the hospital, about the memorial program, the photos of the graves. "And these people," Detective Holbrook said, leaning forward, "the ones who took you from the hospital, did they ever give you their names?" I realized with a jolt that they hadn't. Not once. They'd simply been mom and dad from the moment they walked into my hospital room. I'd never questioned it because I couldn't remember anything else. "No," I admitted. They just acted like my parents, and I believed them because I didn't know any better. The detective nodded slowly. And you said your friend showed you proof that your real parents passed away 3 years ago? Yes, Derek Mullins. He was at the hospital for his wife's appointment. He can verify everything. Detective Holbrook made a note. We'll need to contact him. In the meantime, I'm going to send officers to the address you gave us. Can you describe the house? I did my best, detailing the single-story ranch-style home on a quiet street, the peeling white paint, the overgrown hedges, the detached garage where the man kept his tools. The detective dispatched 2 patrol units while I sat there, hands still trembling. An hour passed, then 2. Detective Holbrook brought me coffee and checked on me periodically, but his expression grew more troubled each time he returned. Finally, he sat down across from me again. We sent officers to that address. The house is empty. No furniture, no personal belongings. It looks like no one's lived there in months. That's impossible, I said. I was there this morning. I've been sleeping in the bedroom at the end of the hall for over a week. I believe you, he said, though his tone suggested he was still evaluating. We found shell casings in the front yard consistent with your story, and there were fresh tire tracks in the driveway. But whoever these people are, they cleared out fast. They knew I'd go to the police, I murmured. They were ready to run. Detective Holbrook studied me for a long moment. I think we need to dig deeper into this, starting with who you actually are. Over the next few days, I became something of a permanent fixture at the police station. Detective Holbrook worked with the hospital to pull my medical records, which confirmed my identity and the fact that I'd been in a coma for 3 years following a severe car accident. The accident had occurred on a rainy night, when my vehicle hydroplaned on the highway and collided with a concrete barrier. I'd suffered traumatic brain injury and had been given less than a 10% chance of ever waking up. My real parents, I learned, had visited me every single day for the first 2 months. Then came the accident on the overpass, the same stretch of road, eerily enough. Police at the time had ruled it an accident caused by icy conditions, though some wondered if the grief had simply become too much. Either way, they'd left their entire estate in a trust designed to keep me on life support indefinitely, managed by a lawyer named Bernard Cahill. That's where this gets interesting, Detective Holbrook told me on the 4th day. Bernard Cahill died of a heart attack 18 months ago. His practice was taken over by his nephew, a man named Victor Cahill. And let me guess, I said. Victor Cahill is involved in this somehow. We're still working on that, but here's what we do know. About 2 months before you woke up, someone petitioned the court to become your legal guardian. The paperwork was filed by Victor Cahill on behalf of a couple named Denise and Raymond Wexler. The names meant nothing to me, but hearing them made my stomach turn. Those were the people who had pretended to be my parents. Those were the names of the strangers who had tried to kill me. Who are they? I asked. That's the problem. Denise and Raymond Wexler don't seem to exist before about 5 years ago. No birth certificates, no school records, no employment history before 2019. The identities appear to be fabricated, so they're con artists, at minimum. But here's what's really troubling me. He slid a folder across the table. Your parents' estate was substantial. The house they owned, the investments, the life insurance payouts. All told, we're talking about nearly $4 million. Most of it was supposed to be held in trust for your medical care and eventually transferred to you upon recovery. Was supposed to be? The accounts have been systematically drained over the past 18 months. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones. By the time you woke up, there was barely enough left to cover your final hospital bills. I felt the blood drain from my face. They stole everything. It looks that way. And I think the plan was to keep you working at that house, isolated and confused, until they could figure out what to do with you. When you started remembering things, when you ran into your friend at the hospital, that threw a wrench in everything. So they decided to kill me instead. That's my theory. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the enormity of what had been done to me. 3 years of my life lost to a coma. My real parents dead, possibly from grief over my condition. My inheritance stolen by strangers who had looked me in the eye and called themselves my family. And when I'd finally started to piece things together, they tried to put a bullet in me. What happens now? I asked. Now we find them, Detective Holbrook said, and we make them answer for what they've done. The search for Denise and Raymond Wexler, or whoever they really were, consumed the next several weeks. I stayed in a modest hotel room paid for by victim assistance funds, spending my days at the police station or the library, trying to reconstruct the fragments of my memory into something coherent. Derek and his wife, Priya, became my lifeline during this time. They invited me over for dinners, showed me photo albums from our college years, helped me remember the person I used to be. I'd been studying engineering, apparently. I'd been on the track team. I'd had a girlfriend named Wendy who'd moved to Seattle after my accident and eventually married someone else. The life they described felt like it belonged to a stranger, but slowly, piece by piece, it started to feel like mine again. You were always stubborn, Derek told me one evening, laughing over beers on his back porch. Remember when Professor Hadley gave you a failing grade on that bridge design and you spent the entire weekend rebuilding it just to prove him wrong? I didn't remember, but hearing the story made something warm flicker in my chest. A recognition of who I had been. I'm starting to get flashes, I admitted. Little things. The smell of coffee reminding me of a specific morning. A song triggering the memory of a road trip. It's like my brain is slowly defrosting. Give it time, Priya said gently. You went through something traumatic. Multiple somethings, actually. Healing isn't linear. She was right. The memories came back in unpredictable waves, sometimes triggered by mundane details, sometimes surfacing in dreams that left me gasping awake at 3 in the morning. I remembered my mother's laugh, high and musical. I remembered my father teaching me to change a tire in the driveway. I remembered the house I'd grown up in, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a tire swing in the backyard. The house that should have been mine. Detective Holbrook called me in on a Tuesday morning with news. We got a hit on facial recognition, he said, sliding a printout across his desk. Raymond Wexler, or the man using that name, is actually Ronald Peretti. He's got a record going back 20 years. Fraud, forgery, theft. Did a stint in federal prison in the early 2000s for running an investment scam targeting elderly widows. I stared at the mugshot, the same cold eyes that had looked down the barrel of a rifle at me. What about the woman? Still working on her. But we've been monitoring credit cards associated with the Wexler identities, and one of them was used at a gas station in Nevada 3 days ago. Nevada? They're running, but they're getting sloppy. Running out of cash probably since the accounts are frozen now. It's only a matter of time. That time came 2 weeks later. I was eating breakfast at the hotel when Detective Holbrook called with 3 words. We got them. The arrest had happened in Reno, at a rundown motel off the main highway. Ronald Peretti and his accomplice, who turned out to be a woman named Colleen Marsh, with her own lengthy criminal history, had been taken into custody without incident. They'd been found with forged documents, burner phones, and over $30,000 in cash, the last remnants of my parents' estate. I drove to the station immediately, needing to see their faces one more time. They were in separate interrogation rooms. Detective Holbrook let me watch through the one-way glass as he questioned Ronald Peretti. How did you find out about him? The detective asked. Ronald, I refused to think of him as my fake dad anymore, leaned back in his chair with an expression of bored resignation. Victor Cahill. We'd worked with him before on some estate matters. Nothing strictly legal, you understand. When his uncle died and he inherited the practice, he found all these trust accounts just sitting there. People in comas, people in nursing homes, people whose families had forgotten about them. Easy pickings. So Cahill recruited you to pose as this young man's parents. It was supposed to be simple. Kid's been in a coma for years. Parents are dead. No other family to speak of. We show up with the right paperwork, get declared as guardians, drain the accounts, and disappear. We'd done similar jobs before, but then the kid woke up. He shook his head, almost marveling at the inconvenience. 3 years in a vegetative state, and he picks the exact wrong moment to rejoin the living. Why not just walk away at that point? Too much money on the line, and Cahill thought we could make it work. Keep the kid confused, isolated. People coming out of comas usually have memory problems, right? We figured we could string him along until we finished draining the accounts, but he kept remembering things, and then he ran into that friend of his at the hospital. Ronald's expression soured. That's when we knew it was over. So, you tried to kill him. I tried to solve a problem. There's a difference. I watched through the glass, fists clenched so tightly my nails drew blood from my palms. This man had looked me in the eye, had called himself my father, had fired a rifle at my back as I ran for my life, and to him, I was nothing but a problem to be solved. Detective Holbrook glanced toward the mirror, knowing I was watching. Your victim is going to be fine, he said to Ronald, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. I hope it was worth it. For the first time, something like fear flickered across Ronald's face. The trial took place 8 months later. Victor Cahill had been arrested separately and charged as a co-conspirator. He tried to claim he'd been coerced by Ronald and Colleen, that he'd never intended for anyone to get hurt. The jury didn't buy it. All 3 of them were convicted on charges ranging from fraud and identity theft to attempted murder. I testified at each trial, recounting every detail of my weeks in that house, every lie they'd told me, every moment of confusion and terror. By the time I was finished, I felt like I'd exorcised something toxic from my system. The sentencing came down hard. Ronald Peretti received 35 years. Colleen Marsh got 20. Victor Cahill, whose betrayal of his professional duties the judge found particularly egregious, received 25 years and was permanently disbarred. As I walked out of the courthouse on the final day, a reporter caught up with me on the steps. How does it feel to see justice served? She asked, shoving a microphone in my face. I thought about the question for a moment before answering. It doesn't bring back my parents. It doesn't give me back the years I lost or the money they stole. But it means they can't do this to anyone else. And right now, that's enough. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life from scratch. The courts eventually recovered about $200,000 of my parents' estate, a fraction of what had been stolen, but enough to start over. I used part of it to visit my real parents' graves for the first time, standing in front of those marble headstones with tears streaming down my face as I told them everything that had happened. I wish you could have seen me wake up, I whispered. I wish you could have been there instead of them. A gentle breeze stirred the flowers I'd placed at the base of each headstone. I chose to interpret it as an answer. Derek helped me find an apartment in the city, close to his place. He also pulled some strings with a former classmate who ran an engineering firm, getting me an entry-level position that didn't require me to explain the 3-year gap in my resume. It wasn't the career I'd imagined for myself before the accident, but it was honest work, and I was grateful for it. My memories continued to return in fragments over the following year. Some were joyful, birthday parties, family vacations, lazy Sunday mornings with my parents. Others were painful, like the phone call I'd received the night of my accident, the one informing me that my grandfather had passed away. I'd been driving to be with my parents when I lost control of the car. That knowledge haunted me for a while. The idea that if I'd just pulled over, if I'd waited until morning, none of this would have happened. My parents might still be alive. I might have woken up with them by my bedside instead of strangers with dollar signs in their eyes. But Priya, who turned out to have a background in psychology, helped me work through the guilt. You can't live in the what-ifs, she told me during one of our many conversations. The accident wasn't your fault. Your parents' deaths weren't your fault. The only people responsible for what happened to you are the ones sitting in prison right now. Everything else is just the chaos of living. She was right, of course. And slowly, I learned to stop blaming myself for things beyond my control. The following spring, I received a letter from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Catherine Wynn, and she claimed to be my mother's cousin. She'd seen the news coverage of the trial, and had been trying to track me down ever since. I called her that same evening. my heart pounding as the phone rang. "I can't believe it's really you," she said when she answered, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mother and I lost touch after she married your father. Family drama, you know how it is. But I always regretted not reaching out. And then when I heard what happened to her and your dad, I tried to find you. But the hospital wouldn't give me any information. I had no idea you were even still alive until I saw you on TV. We talked for 3 hours that first night. She told me stories about my mother as a young woman, about the summers they'd spent together as children, about the falling out that had separated them, and the reconciliation that never came. She would have been so proud of you," Catherine said. "The way you survived all that, the way you fought back. That's pure Eleanor." Eleanor, my mother's name. I'd known it, of course, from the memorial program Derek had shown me, but hearing it spoken by someone who had loved her made it real in a way nothing else had. I flew out to visit Catherine a month later. She lived in a small town in Vermont, in a house filled with family photographs I'd never seen before. There was my mother as a teenager, gap-toothed and grinning, my parents on their wedding day, young and radiant and utterly in love, and me as a baby, cradled in my mother's arms, both of us laughing at something just outside the frame. "I want you to have these," Catherine said, pressing a thick photo album into my hands. "They were your mother's. I've been holding on to them for years, hoping someday I'd be able to give them to someone who deserved them." I couldn't speak. I just held the album to my chest and let the tears come. 2 years after waking from my coma, I finally felt like I had a life again. Not the life I'd had before. That was gone forever. But something new. Something built on the ashes of everything I'd lost. I had a job I enjoyed, friends who cared about me, and a slowly expanding family that included Catherine and her 3 grown children, who welcomed me as the cousin they'd never known. I also had answers, finally, to questions that had haunted me since the beginning. Detective Holbrook reached out to me one afternoon with news about my real parents' accident. He'd never fully accepted the official ruling that it had been caused by icy conditions, and he'd spent months quietly investigating on his own time. "I found a witness," he told me, "a truck driver who was on that overpass the night your parents died. He came forward after seeing the news coverage of the trial, said he saw another vehicle force your parents' car toward the barrier, said he reported it at the time, but the responding officers dismissed it. Another vehicle? A black sedan. The witness couldn't get a plate number, but he was certain about what he saw. The implication hung in the air between us. You think someone killed them. I think it's possible. And I think Victor Cahill's uncle might have known more than anyone realized about your parents' estate. Maybe he decided to speed up the timeline. Maybe your parents started asking too many questions about where their money was going, but he died of a heart attack. That's what the death certificate says. But given everything else we've learned about this operation, I'm not sure I believe it anymore." I sat with that information for a long time after we hung up. The idea that my parents might have been murdered, that their deaths might have been the first step in a conspiracy to steal everything they'd left behind, it was almost too much to bear, but it also made a terrible kind of sense. I asked Detective Holbrook to keep digging, and he did. Over the following months, he unearthed financial connections between the late Bernard Cahill and Ronald Peretti going back decades. He found suspicious transactions in the weeks before my parents' accident. He even located another witness who remembered seeing a black sedan near the overpass that night. It wasn't enough for a conviction. Everyone involved was either dead or already in prison for other crimes, but it was enough for me to know the truth. My parents hadn't died because of icy roads or grief or bad luck. They'd been killed because they stood between criminals and their money. They'd been killed because they loved me too much to let go. I visited their graves again on the 3rd anniversary of their deaths, this time with a sense of closure I hadn't had before. "I know what happened now," I told them, kneeling in the soft grass between their headstones. "I know you didn't give up. I know you fought for me until the very end. And I want you to know that I'm going to keep fighting too. I'm going to live a life that would make you proud. I promise." The breeze stirred again, gentler this time, like a caress. I stayed until sunset, watching the light fade over the cemetery, thinking about everything I'd lost and everything I'd found. My parents were gone, but their love had kept me alive through 3 years of darkness. Strangers had tried to steal everything they'd left behind, but in the end, the only thing that truly mattered was something they could never take. I remembered who I was, and that was enough. 5 years after waking from my coma, I stood in front of a small gathering in Derek and Priya's backyard, raising a glass of champagne as afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees. "To family," I said, looking around at the faces assembled before me. Derek and Priya, who had welcomed me back into a life I couldn't remember. Catherine and her children, who had given me roots I never knew I had. Detective Holbrook, who had gone far beyond the call of duty to seek justice, and a dozen other friends and colleagues who had become my community over the years. "To family," they echoed, raising their glasses. I'd spent so long mourning what I'd lost that I'd almost missed what I'd gained. But standing there in that moment, surrounded by people who cared about me, I finally understood that family wasn't just about blood or memory or shared history. It was about the connections you build, the people who show up for you when everything falls apart, the love that persists even when it has every reason to fade. My parents were gone. That would always hurt. But their legacy lived on in me, in the values they'd instilled, in the strength they'd passed down. Every time I chose kindness over cynicism, perseverance over despair, I was honoring their memory. After the toast, I wandered to the edge of the yard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Priya appeared beside me, a knowing smile on her face. "Penny, for your thoughts?" I considered the question. I was just thinking about how strange life is. 5 years ago, I woke up with nothing. No memories, no family, no identity. And now look at all this. "You built it," she said simply. "Piece by piece. That's not strange, that's remarkable. I had help. Everyone needs help. The important thing is that you let people in. After everything you went through, you could have closed yourself off. You didn't." I thought about that for a moment. She was right. There had been times when isolation seemed easier, when trust felt like too much of a risk. But every time I'd reached out instead of pulling back, something good had come of it. I got lucky. I admitted. Priya shook her head. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. You were prepared to heal. The opportunity just had to find you. I didn't have a response to that, so I just smiled and turned back to the sunset. Somewhere out there, beyond the fading light, my parents were at peace. I had to believe that. I had to believe that they knew I was okay, that the love they'd poured into me hadn't been wasted, that their sacrifice had meaning. And somewhere out there, in prison cells scattered across the country, the people who had tried to destroy me were paying for their crimes. Justice wasn't perfect. It couldn't restore what had been taken, but it was real, and it mattered. As for me, I was still here, still standing, still moving forward. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was unwritten, and I intended to fill every page with something worth remembering. 1 year later, I accepted a position at an engineering firm specializing in bridge construction. The irony wasn't lost on me. After everything I'd been through, after all the bridges that had played roles in my tragedy, I was now helping to build ones that would carry others safely across dangerous spaces. There was something poetic in that, something my college self would have appreciated. On my first major project, I was assigned to work on an overpass spanning a river just outside the city. Standing at the construction site, looking down at the rushing water below, I felt the familiar pull of memory. My parents' car, sinking into darkness, their fingers intertwined until the very end. But the grief didn't consume me the way it once had. Instead, I channeled it into my work, ensuring every calculation was precise, every support structure sound. When the bridge opened 6 months later, I drove across it alone at midnight, windows down, feeling the cool air on my face. "This one's for you," I whispered into the darkness. The next morning, I received a call from Detective Holbrook. He'd retired the previous year but still kept in touch, checking in on me every few months. "Just wanted to see how you're doing," he said, "and to let you know that Colleen Marsh is up for parole next month. Thought you should hear it from me." My stomach tightened. Already? Good behavior, overcrowding, the usual excuses. I testified against her release, but these things don't always go the way they should. I was quiet for a long moment, processing. What happens if she gets out? There's a restraining order in place. She can't contact you or come within 500 feet. But realistically, she'll probably violate parole within 6 months and end up back inside. People like her don't change. And Ronald? Victor? Still locked up tight. Neither of them is going anywhere for a long time. That was something, at least. I thanked him for the heads up and hung up, staring at the phone in my hand. The news should have rattled me more than it did. A year ago, it probably would have. But I'd spent so long rebuilding myself, confronting my fears, learning to live with uncertainty, that the possibility of Colleen's release felt less like a threat than a test. Could I maintain my peace even knowing she might be out there somewhere? Could I keep moving forward without looking over my shoulder? I decided I could. I had to. Colleen Marsh did get paroled, as it turned out, and Detective Holbrook was right. She violated the terms within 4 months and was sent back to prison for another 5 years. I learned about it through the news, not through any personal encounter, and I allowed myself a grim satisfaction at the outcome. But the experience taught me something important. Closure wasn't a destination. It was a practice. Every day I had to choose to let go of the anger, the fear, the what-ifs. Some days were easier than others, but the choice was always mine. 10 years after waking from my coma, I got married. Her name was Rachel Chen, a structural engineer I'd met at a conference. She was sharp and funny and completely unimpressed by my tragic backstory, which was exactly what I needed. On our first date, she told me she'd Googled me and read all about the trial. "Sounds like you've had a rough go of it," she said matter-of-factly, "but I'm more interested in who you are now than who you were then." It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to me. We got married in Catherine's backyard in Vermont, surrounded by the family I'd found and the family I'd built. Derek was my best man. Priya did a reading. Detective Holbrook, now fully gray but still sharp as ever, watched from the front row with what I could have sworn were tears in his eyes. And in my pocket, tucked into the lining of my jacket, was a photograph Catherine had given me years ago. My parents on their wedding day, young and radiant and utterly in love. They would have adored Rachel. I was sure of it. As I stood at the altar, watching my bride walk toward me, I felt their presence as clearly as I'd ever felt anything. They were there, somewhere beyond the veil, cheering me on. They had been with me through the darkness, through the lies, through the long and painful journey back to myself, and they were with me now, in this moment of joy. "I love you," I mouthed to Rachel as she reached me. "I know," she mouthed back, grinning. The ceremony was beautiful, but the moment I'll remember most came afterward during the reception. Catherine approached me with the photo album she'd given me years ago, now worn from frequent handling. "I added something," she said, opening to the last page. There, mounted carefully alongside images of my parents, was a photograph from the ceremony. Rachel and me, hands clasped, faces lit with happiness, and beneath it, in Catherine's careful handwriting, "The story continues." I pulled her into a hug, unable to speak. The story did continue. It continues still. There are moments when the past reaches up to grab me. A certain smell, a particular angle of light, a song on the radio. I still dream sometimes about that house, about the cold eyes of strangers who called themselves my parents, about the sound of a rifle firing behind me. I probably always will. But those moments don't define me. What defines me is what comes after. The choice to keep going. The decision to trust again. The stubborn refusal to let the worst thing that ever happened to me become the only thing I am. My real parents taught me that. Their love, their sacrifice, their unwavering belief that I would wake up. That's the foundation everything else is built on. I am who I am because they loved me first. And every day, in ways large and small, I try to pass that love on.